Stuck at mom's for dinner. Love you. That message sat on a Vera Solin's screen longer than it should have. Hello to every woman watching tonight. I hope you are safe where you are. I hope your home feels calm. Welcome to Midnight Story Vault, a place for stories that don't just entertain, but leave you wiser than you were before. Stories about truth, choice, and what happens when words don't match actions. Wherever you are listening from tonight, may your space feel secure. May the walls around you hold peace, not tension. May love in your life be honest, not confusing. And if someone has ever made you question your worth through half-truths or silence, may you learn that clarity is not cruelty, it is protection. That message sat on a Vera Solin's screen longer than it should have. Not because it confused her, but because it confirmed something she had been feeling for weeks. Certainty has a sound. So does dishonesty. People often think lies are obvious. They're not. The most convincing lies are calm, familiar, affectionate. They don't shout, they reassure. That's why they work. Vera didn't reply right away. She didn't smile. She didn't sigh. She lifted her eyes. 3 tables away. Same restaurant. Same night. Same hour he claimed he was elsewhere. Rice Calderon sat comfortably in his chair, jacket off, posture relaxed. The posture of a man who believed his story was airtight. His phone rested beside his plate, screen dark, confidence intact. Then he leaned in, not toward his food, toward the woman beside him, and kissed her. Not hurried, not careless, intentional. Vera didn't gasp, didn't reach for her glass, didn't look away. She looked back down at her phone. Because now, she wasn't guessing. She was witnessing. And there is a difference every woman should learn early. Doubt drains you. Truth steadies you. She began to type. Before we go any further, let's pause for just a moment. Some lessons don't arrive loudly. They arrive as quiet confirmations. Vera Solin exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxed, her heartbeat steady. This wasn't shock. This was recognition. There's a point in life where you stop asking, could I be wrong? And start asking, why did I ignore what I already knew? That shift changes everything. It turns uncertainty into resolve. Across the room, laughter drifted from nearby tables. Plates clinked. A server passed between them without noticing the invisible line that had just been crossed. Rice smiled at the woman beside him, his hand resting comfortably on her arm. He looked unburdened. A man who believed distance protected him. A man who believed truth was flexible if delivered gently. Vera watched without anger. Anger demands energy. Clarity does not. She studied the scene the way one studies a fact, not emotionally but completely. The timing, the comfort, the ease. None of this was accidental. This is something no one teaches you directly. When someone lies smoothly, they've practiced. When they lie calmly, they believe you won't question it. And that belief is the real insult. Vera's phone vibrated faintly as the screen dimmed, reminding her she hadn't responded yet. She lifted it again, thumbs poised, eyes steady. This wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't about confrontation. It was about alignment. Words either match reality, or they don't. And when they don't, the responsibility isn't to explain, it's to respond. She began to type. There's a reason stories like this matter, not because they're dramatic, but because they're familiar. Welcome to Midnight Story Vault, where we tell stories that don't rush to comfort you, but teach you how to trust yourself. Stories about decisions, dignity, and the moments that quietly change the direction of a life. If you believe honesty should feel safe, and that peace is worth choosing, you belong here. And if you're listening right now, you're already part of the vault. Vera's fingers hovered above the screen for a brief second longer, not because she needed time, but because she understood something many people miss. Once you respond, the story moves forward. There's no pause button after clarity arrives. She glanced back up. Rice laughed softly at something the woman beside him said. He leaned closer. Familiar, unconcerned. He looked like a man who had never been interrupted by consequences. That's the danger of comfort built on dishonesty. It convinces the person telling the lie that nothing will ever interrupt it. Across the room, Avera's expression didn't change. She wasn't calculating revenge. She wasn't preparing a speech. She wasn't rehearsing lines in her head. She was choosing herself. And here's the educational truth hidden inside moments like this. You don't owe explanations to someone who chose deception. You owe yourself consistency. Her thumbs began to move. Not quickly, not emotionally, deliberately. She typed a single line. Avera finished typing. Enjoy dinner with your mom. She didn't rush to send it. She lifted her eyes one last time. Rice's phone sat on the table, just close enough to his hand that he could reach it without thinking. The woman beside him was mid-sentence, smiling, unaware that she was seconds away from learning the truth. Avera adjusted her grip on her own phone and raised it slightly. The angle was clean. The distance irrelevant. She didn't zoom in on drama. She didn't frame it like evidence for an argument. She framed it like truth. His face, the table, the closeness that contradicted every word he'd written. She attached the photo. Then she pressed send. The sound of his phone hitting the floor was sharp enough to cut through nearby conversations. Two heads turned. A server paused. Rice froze. Not halfway through movement, not uncertain. Completely still. Across the room, Avera lifted her champagne glass just enough for him to see her. Not in mockery, not in victory, just acknowledgement. She knew, and now he knew she knew. The woman beside him frowned. What's wrong? Rice didn't answer. He stood so fast his chair scraped backward. Avera, he said as he crossed the space between them, his voice lowered but urgent. This isn't what it looks like. She met his eyes calmly. Sit down. You're drawing attention. He hesitated. Then he obeyed. The woman he'd been with stared at them, confusion shifting into something sharper. Who is she? Avera turned to her, her tone steady, her posture relaxed. I'm the woman he just told he was having dinner with his mother. Silence settled heavily between them. The woman's expression drained. You said you were single. Rice snapped. This isn't the place. No, Avera said gently, cutting him off. This is exactly the place. The woman stood, grabbed her bag, and looked at Rice with disgust. You're embarrassing. She walked away without another word. Rice swallowed. Avera, listen to me. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with unhurried precision. You lied with impressive confidence. He reached for her hand. She allowed it, just long enough for him to believe there was still space to fix this. Then she withdrew. Why? She asked. Not why her. Why the lie? He exhaled. I didn't want complications. She nodded once. You didn't want consequences. That's not fair. She smiled faintly. You kissed another woman in public and texted me from 3 tables away. Fair wasn't involved. People were watching now. Rice lowered his voice. Let's talk somewhere private. No, Avera said. You prefer private when it protects you. He searched her face. What do you want? She held his gaze. The truth. He hesitated. Too long. Her smile faded. That pause, she said quietly, is the answer. She stood, placed a bill on the table, and picked up her coat. We're done. Rice stood quickly. You can't just walk away. I can, she replied. And I am. She walked past him without another glance. And in that moment something important happened, something educational, something real. Truth doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it simply leaves. Avera had taken 3 steps away from the table when Rice spoke again. Avera, not loud, not pleading, controlled. She paused. The room felt it. Some moments in restaurants are politely ignored. This wasn't one of them. Conversations dulled. A fork hovered midair. Someone at the bar looked over and didn't look away. Rice stepped closer. We don't need an audience. Avera turned slowly. Then you shouldn't have invited one. The woman who had been sitting with him hadn't left yet. She stood near the host stand, phone in hand, posture tight. She looked at Rise. You said she was no one. This isn't your concern, he said, eyes still on Avera. The woman laughed once, short, sharp. You made it my concern when you kissed me. Avera studied her. Not critically, not competitively. Clearly. You didn't know, Avera said. That much is obvious. The woman swallowed. He said he wasn't seeing anyone. Said he hated dishonesty. Avera nodded. People often say what they want believed. That landed. Rice exhaled. Can we step outside? Avera shook her head. You're still trying to rearrange the setting. This isn't appropriate. You sent a lie into the world, she replied calmly. It arrived where it arrived. Silence spread. Not curiosity, but discomfort. The woman picked up her bag. I don't stay where truth has to compete. She looked at Avera. I'm sorry. Then she walked out. Rice watched her go before turning back. You didn't have to do that. I didn't, Avera said. I stopped pretending. You're humiliating me. No, she replied. I'm witnessing you. That distinction mattered. Let's talk somewhere private, he said. You prefer private, she answered evenly. When it protects you. He straightened his jacket. The reflex he used when image mattered more than honesty. This isn't fair. What part feels unfair? She asked. That you didn't let me explain. I watched you explain, she said. With your behavior. That's not the same. It is, she replied. It just doesn't use words. He leaned closer. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. You made it exactly as big as it is. A server approached carefully. Would you like the check? Yes, Avera said. Rice started to speak. Stopped. The server nodded and left. You're shutting me out. I'm closing a door, she said, that you kept walking through without permission. That hit harder than anger. I care about you, he said. Care doesn't require secrecy. What do you want from me right now? She paused, deliberately. I want you to understand, she said, that calm isn't weakness. He scoffed. You think you're in control. She smiled faintly. I know I am. The check arrived. Avera slid her card inside without looking. You don't even want to see the total? He asked. I already know the cost. That unsettled him. He sat back down, uninvited. So, this is final? This is accurate. I made a mistake. You made a decision, she replied. The mistake would have been pretending it didn't count. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Pressure doesn't rewrite character, she said. It reveals it. Silence. So, you're done? He asked. I'm done negotiating reality. You're throwing this away over one moment. Moments matter, she said, especially the ones people assume won't be seen. The server returned. Avera signed, stood, and slipped on her coat. You're not even angry, Rice said. Anger requires investment, she replied. I'm withdrawing. He reached out, stopping short. If you walk away, I already am. At the door she turned back once. It happened the way it matched the truth. Then she left. The door closed softly. Inside, conversations resumed. Quieter, more careful. Rice remained standing. Not abandoned, seen. And that was the part he couldn't undo. Because when a lie collapses in public, what follows isn't punishment. It's clarity. Morning arrived without drama. No pounding headache. No racing thoughts. No urge to replay the night. Avera woke up clear. That clarity mattered, because clarity is how boundaries hold. She had just finished pouring coffee when the knock came. Not tentative, not polite. Insistent. She didn't check the time. She already knew who it was. Avera opened the door halfway, leaving the chain loose but visible. Rice stood there, eyes tired, jaw tight, his jacket from the night before draped over his arm like proof he hadn't gone home. You don't get to show up like this, she said calmly. I needed to see you, he replied. You walked away before I could fix it. She studied him for a moment, not emotionally, accurately. You're not here to fix anything, she said. You're here because silence makes you uncomfortable. He took a step forward. The chain caught. That sound, metal stopping movement, said more than either of them could. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "We should talk inside." "No," Avera replied evenly. "We're talking right here. Educational truth lives in moments like this. Access is not a right. It's a privilege that can be removed without explanation." Rice ran a hand through his hair. "You're acting cold." "I'm acting clear," she corrected. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that." She met his eyes. "That's not what you regret." He frowned. "What?" "You regret the discovery," Avera said, "not the decision." The words landed and stayed. Rice opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he didn't argue. Rice exhaled sharply and glanced down the hallway, as if expecting someone to witness his unraveling. The quiet of the building pressed in on him. No audience, no distraction, just consequences without noise. "You're overreacting," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "People make mistakes. Adults talk through them." Avera didn't move. The door remained half open. The chain stayed in place. "Adults respect boundaries," she replied. "They don't push past them." He reached for the doorframe, stopping himself at the last second. His hand hovered there, unsure. That hesitation was new. "I'm not asking for much," he said. "Just a conversation." "You're asking for comfort," Avera answered, "and you forfeited that. Educational truth doesn't need force. When someone ignores limits repeatedly, enforcement becomes necessary." Rice laughed quietly, the sound brittle. "So, this is it? You freeze me out and pretend you're fine?" She met his gaze. "I don't pretend. I decide." That unsettled him. He stepped back, then forward again, agitation replacing control. "You think you're winning?" Avera's expression didn't change. "This isn't a competition." "Then what is it?" "It's me not betraying myself to make you feel better." The words landed harder than accusation ever could. Rice rubbed his face, pacing the narrow space in front of her door. "I didn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about you." She nodded once. "That's what happens when you lose access without warning." He stopped pacing. "You're punishing me." "No," Avera replied. "I'm protecting myself." Silence stretched between them, heavy but clean. Rice swallowed. "If you let me explain." She shook her head gently. "You've explained enough with your actions." The chain stayed where it was, and for the first time that morning, Rice understood. This line wasn't temporary. Rice's phone buzzed in his hand. He ignored it. Whatever waited on the screen felt less urgent than the loss standing in front of him. "I can change," he said suddenly. "You know I can." Avera watched him carefully. Not skeptically, precisely. "Change doesn't begin with promises," she said. "It begins with accountability." He scoffed, though his voice wavered. "You're acting like I planned this." "You planned the lie," she replied. "The rest followed naturally." Educational truth is often uncomfortable. Repeated dishonesty isn't an accident. It's a habit. Rice stepped closer again, frustration breaking through his polished restraint. "You're punishing me because you're hurt." Avera didn't deny the hurt. She didn't need to. "I'm choosing distance because you're unsafe to trust," she said calmly. That word, unsafe, hit him harder than anger would have. "You're exaggerating." She shook her head once. "You kissed someone else in public and texted me from the same room. That's not exaggeration. That's evidence." Rice pressed his lips together, eyes darting, searching for a way back in. "You don't throw people away over one mistake." She met his gaze evenly. "I didn't throw you away. I stepped aside." His breathing quickened. "You think you're better than me?" "No," she replied. "I think I'm responsible for myself." That difference mattered. Rice's composure cracked. "So what? You're done forever." Avera considered him for a brief moment. Not with hope, with honesty. "I'm done until truth stops feeling optional to you," she said. He laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "That's impossible." She nodded. "Then this ends here." The hallway felt suddenly smaller. Rice looked at the chain on the door again, then at her. "You're really doing this?" "Yes," she replied. "And I'm doing it calmly." Calm, he realized, was the part he couldn't fight. Rice stood still for a moment longer, as if waiting for something to change. It didn't. The hallway remained quiet. The chain stayed in place. Avera's posture didn't soften. This was the part most people misunderstand. Boundaries aren't loud. They don't threaten. They don't negotiate endlessly. They simply exist and hold. "You're really not letting me in," he said finally. Avera nodded. "Not today, and not like this." He searched her face for hesitation and found none. What unsettled him wasn't her firmness, but her peace. She wasn't bracing herself. She wasn't rehearsing strength. She had already chosen it. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, quieter now. She answered gently, "Intent doesn't undo impact. Educational truth lives here. Care without honesty still causes damage. Love doesn't require secrecy to survive." Rice looked down, then back up. "So what am I supposed to do now?" Avera didn't answer immediately. "Sit with what you avoided," she said, "and stop asking me to carry it for you." The words landed without cruelty, without heat. He nodded slowly, as if understanding something too late. Avera reached for the door and eased it closed, until only the chain remained visible. Before she stepped back, she said one last thing, not to wound him, but to be clear. "If someone lies easily," she said, "that isn't love. It's convenience." She closed the door. On the other side, Rice stood alone, confronted by silence that didn't chase him, didn't argue with him, didn't explain itself. Inside, Avera leaned briefly against the door, not in weakness, but in release. For the first time since the night before, her space felt like hers again. The morning after Rice stood outside her door, Avera didn't stay in bed replaying conversations. She dressed. Comfortable clothes, hair pulled back, phone fully charged. Calm is most dangerous when it's purposeful. By 10 a.m., she was seated across from her attorney, a woman who didn't waste words and never confused speed with care. "You're certain?" the attorney asked, sliding a folder across the table. Avera opened it without hesitation. "I'm finished pretending proximity equals partnership." The attorney studied her face. "This isn't retaliation." "No," Avera replied. "It's separation. Educational truth lives here. Reacting is emotional. Acting is intentional." The documents were clear. Clean, precise. No dramatics. No commentary. Just boundaries translated into language the law respects. Avera signed where indicated. Once, then again. Each signature removed her from joint authority, shared accounts, and advisory oversight. Every line reduced access Rice had assumed was permanent. "Once this is filed," the attorney said, "there's no soft reversal." Avera nodded. "I don't need one." That afternoon, Rice was in his office, reviewing numbers that refused to settle, when his assistant appeared in the doorway, color drained from her face. "Sir," she said carefully, "we have a problem." Rice didn't look up. "Schedule it." "This isn't scheduling," she replied. "Avera Solon has executed full withdrawal from all shared holdings." Rice's pen stopped mid-stroke. "What do you mean executed?" he asked. "It's done," she said, legally airtight. He stood so fast his chair slid backward. "She didn't warn me." The assistant swallowed. She didn't need to. That was the moment it landed. Avera hadn't argued. She hadn't negotiated. She hadn't waited for closure. She had moved. And this is where viewers learn something vital. People who mean what they say don't announce consequences. They implement them. Rice stared at the window, phone clenched in his hand. For the first time, the silence wasn't something he controlled. It was something that acted without him. Rice stared at the documents his assistant had laid across the desk. Not because he didn't understand them. Because he did. Every page was unmistakably Avera's work. Clean formatting. Exact language. No loopholes. No leverage left dangling. It wasn't just withdrawal. It was removal with foresight. His assistant hovered nearby, hands clasped tightly. She didn't leave anything unresolved, she added quietly. Every transition clause is accounted for. Rice looked up slowly. She planned this. The assistant hesitated. She prepared for it. That distinction mattered. Planning implies malice. Preparation implies self-preservation. He flipped through the pages again, irritation sharpening into something colder. When was this filed? Yesterday afternoon. His jaw tightened. While I was at her door. Yes. The realization hit with uncomfortable precision. While he was asking for explanations, she was ending access. Educational truth lives here. Urgency is not power. Preparation is. The assistant's phone buzzed. Then again. She glanced at the screen, panic creeping in. Our partners are already asking questions. Rice stood and paced behind the desk. Tell them it's temporary. She didn't move. Sir, it isn't. That was the moment his confidence faltered. He stopped pacing. What do you mean? She removed her name, but also her endorsement, the assistant said carefully. Several partnerships were contingent on her advisory role. Rice's breath slowed. You're saying this affects operations. I'm saying it affects credibility. Silence filled the office. Rice dropped into his chair, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. She didn't say a word. No, the assistant replied. She didn't argue. The phone on his desk began to vibrate again. This time, he didn't ignore it. Investor, board liaison, legal counsel. Each call carried the same undercurrent: confusion, concern, reassessment. Rice ended the call and looked at his assistant. She's dismantling me. The assistant shook her head gently. She's disengaging. That correction hurt more than accusation, because dismantling implies intention to destroy. Disengaging implies refusal to carry weight that was never hers alone. Rice leaned back, staring at nothing. For the first time, he understood something he'd never needed to before. Avera wasn't emotional. She was surgical, and surgeries don't require anger. They require precision. Rice called her. Once. Straight to voicemail. He called again, slower this time, as if pacing the dial would change the outcome. Nothing. He set the phone down, stared at it, then picked it up again. Typed a message. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't expose him further. That was the difference now. Every word felt late. His assistant returned quietly. Legal is asking if you want to contest the withdrawal. Rice looked at her. Can I? She chose her words carefully. You can try. He exhaled sharply. And you'd lose, she said. She anticipated resistance. Educational truth settles here. When someone prepares thoroughly, opposition only proves their point. Rice stood and walked to the window. The city looked the same as it always had. Busy, indifferent, unmoved by personal collapse. She didn't threaten me, he said slowly. She didn't warn me. No, the assistant replied. She acted. That word again. Acted. Rice laughed once. Humorless. So, this is punishment? The assistant shook her head. This is consequence. He turned from the window. There's a difference? Yes, she said. Punishment is emotional. Consequence is structural. That landed harder than anything else she'd said all morning. Rice checked his phone again. Still nothing. He had always believed silence meant leverage. Whoever spoke first lost ground. But this silence didn't wait for him. It moved around him. Schedule a meeting with legal, he said finally. The assistant nodded. Already done. And the board? She hesitated. They requested one. When? This afternoon. Rice closed his eyes briefly. Avera wasn't reacting to his behavior. She was reorganizing her life without him. And here's the lesson viewers don't forget. When someone stops responding and starts restructuring, the relationship has already shifted beyond repair. Rice opened his eyes. She's doing this to hurt me. The assistant didn't agree. She didn't disagree either. She simply said, she's doing this to be free. That word followed him as he sat back down at his desk. Free, not angry, not vengeful, not dramatic. free, and that terrified him more than confrontation ever could. Avera returned to her attorney's office the next morning, not because anything had gone wrong, because she preferred to be thorough. The attorney reviewed a final document and slid it forward. This completes the separation. Avera scanned the page once. Any exposure? Minimal, the attorney replied. And manageable, Avera nodded. Then finalize it. The attorney hesitated. You understand something important here. Avera looked up. People expect reaction, the attorney continued. They expect anger, retaliation, spectacle. I know, Avera said. And you chose distance instead, the attorney said. That often costs more. Avera met her gaze. It costs less than staying. Educational truth belongs here. Revenge consumes energy. Distance preserves it. The attorney signed, sealed, and filed the last document. He'll feel this more than any public confrontation. Avera stood. That isn't my concern. Outside, the day moved on without commentary. No calls, no interruptions, no explanations demanded. Distance doesn't announce itself. It simply removes access. Across town, Rice sat in a conference room, legal counsel speaking in careful tones he barely registered. Her position was foundational, one of them said. Her withdrawal isn't symbolic. Rice stared at the table. So, what happens now? The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Now you absorb the cost. How much? Rice asked. The lawyer didn't answer immediately. More than you expected. That was the moment it settled. Avera hadn't screamed. She hadn't exposed him. She hadn't chased closure. She had stepped away, completely. And the cost of that distance was far greater than revenge ever could have been. Because revenge keeps people connected. Distance ends the conversation. Rice leaned back in his chair, a strange quiet filling the room. For the first time, he understood the power he'd underestimated. Not anger, not accusation, absence. The charity event had always been familiar territory for Rice. Crystal chandeliers, soft music, carefully arranged seating, a room designed to reward confidence and recognition. He arrived alone. That was the first shift. Not dramatic, not announced. Just noticeable enough for people to register it without commenting. His name still carried weight, but weight behaves differently when it isn't supported. Rice adjusted his cufflinks as he stepped inside, posture upright, expression composed. He moved through the space the way he always had, with ease rehearsed over years. But ease only works when it's reciprocated. The first greeting came from a couple he'd known for years. Their smiles arrived half a second late. Rice, the man said warmly. Good to see you. Likewise, Rice replied. The woman leaned in. Air kissed his cheek, then pulled back too quickly. Avera couldn't make it tonight. The question was casual. The effect wasn't. Rice smiled. She had other commitments. Of course, the woman said, nodding too fast. Of course. They excused themselves moments later. Rice watched them go, the space they left behind wider than it should have been. This is how public perception shifts, not with confrontation but with pauses, with questions asked gently and answers that don't settle. He crossed the room, greeting another investor, then another. Each exchange followed the same pattern. Friendly words, tight expressions, conversations that ended sooner than expected. No one challenged him. No one confronted him. They simply adjusted. Educational truth lives here. Reputation doesn't collapse loudly. It thins out. People step back before they step away. A donor he'd once counted as reliable shook his hand, then glanced past him. We'll circle back soon. Soon had become a placeholder. Rice lifted his glass and took a measured sip, eyes scanning the room. Avera's absence wasn't just visible. It was instructive. People weren't asking where she was because they missed her presence. They were noticing the difference it made. And for the first time that evening, Rice felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not panic, recognition. Rice moved toward a familiar cluster near the center of the room. This group usually welcomed him without hesitation. Tonight, Their circle didn't quite open. "Rise," one of them said, stepping forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're looking well." "Thank you," Rice replied. "How's the expansion going?" "Steady," the man said. "We've been reassessing." That word again. Reassessing. A woman beside him tilted her head slightly. Avera had such a sharp sense for timing. She always knew when to push and when to pause. Rice nodded. "She's very capable." "Yes," the woman agreed. That's what made her presence reassuring. Reassuring. Not decorative. Not optional. Rice felt the shift then, not as hostility, but as recalibration. People weren't aligning against him. They were rebalancing away from uncertainty. Another investor approached, handshake brief. "We're finalizing our positions," he said lightly. "Nothing personal." Rice smiled. "Of course, but it was personal. Not emotionally, structurally. Educational truth lives here. Trust isn't withdrawn out of malice. It's withdrawn to manage risk." He noticed how conversations changed when he joined them. Topics softened. Opinions stayed neutral. Decisions were deferred. People who once sought his input now offered updates instead. Information without invitation. A woman he recognized from previous events leaned in. "I hope everything's all right." Her tone was gentle, concerned. Rice answered smoothly. "We're just adjusting." She nodded, understanding more than she said. Adjustment periods can be revealing. She excused herself shortly after. Rice stood alone for a moment, glass untouched in his hand. The room hummed around him, but no one lingered near long enough for momentum to build. This was the fracture. Not loud, not dramatic, measured. He glanced toward the entrance again, a reflex he didn't fully understand until it happened. He wasn't expecting Avera to arrive. He was noticing how much the room still anticipated her. And in that realization, something settled uncomfortably. Her absence wasn't a gap. It was a statement. The headlines didn't appear that night. They waited. That was the first thing Rice noticed the next morning. How calm everything looked at first glance. No alerts, no frantic calls, just a neat stack of notifications that grew heavier the longer he stared at them. He opened the first article slowly. "Billionaire executive loses strategic partner amid organizational shift." The language was careful, neutral, almost polite. That was worse. There was no accusation to fight, no scandal to deny, just facts arranged in a way that invited questions. He scrolled. Mentions of restructuring, references to confidence recalibration, quotes from unnamed sources speaking about long-term stability. Avera's name appeared once, not as an accessory, as a benchmark. Educational truth lives here. Public narratives don't need drama to be damaging. They only need consistency. By mid-morning, the second article landed. Then the third, different outlets. Same tone. No malice, no speculation, just alignment. Rice's phone buzzed again, this time from a long-standing donor. "I wanted to check in," the message read. "We're taking a step back for now." A step back, always phrased kindly, always framed as temporary. But steps back, repeated often enough, create distance. Rice closed the article and leaned back in his chair. The silence in his office felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was evaluative. This wasn't punishment. It was repositioning. He realized then that Avera hadn't needed to speak publicly. Her absence had already said everything. She didn't clarify. She didn't explain. She detached, and the world adjusted accordingly. Another notification appeared, a photo from the charity event. Him standing alone, glass in hand, mid-conversation that never completed. The caption read, "A changing landscape." Rice shut off the screen. The cost of distance wasn't immediate. It accumulated. Quietly, precisely. Rice waited until evening before calling her. He told himself it was strategic, that he needed time to think, to regain footing. The truth was simpler. He needed the quiet to stop echoing. Avera answered on the third ring. "Yes?" she said. Her voice wasn't guarded. It wasn't cold. It was neutral. "Is this what you wanted?" he asked. A pause. "Not for effect, for precision. I wanted distance," Avera replied. "This is what distance does." He exhaled slowly. "People are talking." "Yes," she said. "They always do when something changes. You knew this would affect me." "I knew staying would affect me more. Educational truth holds here. Choosing yourself doesn't require cruelty. It requires clarity." Rice's voice tightened. "You're dismantling everything." "No," Avera said calmly. "I'm detaching." The word landed cleanly. Not angry, not dramatic. Final. "You could have warned me," he said. "I warned you when I asked for honesty," she replied. "You chose not to listen." Silence followed. This time, it wasn't heavy. It was resolved. Rice tried once more. "Do you hate me?" "No," Avera answered. "Hate keeps people connected." She waited. "I don't need connection," she continued. "I need peace." Rice closed his eyes. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to salvage. "I loved you," he said, almost to himself. "I know," she replied. "But love doesn't survive dishonesty." She ended the call. Across town, Rice sat alone, phone resting in his palm, understanding finally settling in. This wasn't revenge, it was removal. And removal, he realized too late, changes everything. The boardroom was already full when Rice arrived. That, too, was new. Usually they waited for him. Today they were seated, folders open, screens lit, conversations already concluded. The atmosphere wasn't hostile, it was efficient. Efficiency is what replaces loyalty when confidence fades. Rice took his seat at the head of the table out of habit. No one corrected him. No one acknowledged it either. The chairwoman cleared her throat. "Let's begin. No pleasantries, no warm-up, just direction." A man to her left adjusted his glasses. "Avera Solan's withdrawal has exposed a dependency we failed to measure accurately." Rice straightened. She was an advisor. The chairwoman met his eyes. She was a stabilizer. The word settled in the room. Stabilizers aren't decorative. They don't exist to impress. They exist to prevent collapse. Another board member spoke next, tone neutral. Her involvement wasn't symbolic. Her judgment influenced investor confidence, partner alignment, and risk tolerance. Rice frowned. "You're overstating her role." "No," the chairwoman replied calmly. "We're correcting how it was described. Educational truth belongs here. When organizations re-evaluate language, it's because reality has forced them to." Rice leaned forward. "So, what are you saying?" "We're saying," another voice added, "that the structure functioned because of balance. That balance is now absent." The word absent echoed softly in the room. Rice glanced around the table, searching for reassurance. He found professionalism instead. "This feels personal," he said. The chairwoman shook her head once. "This is operational." That distinction mattered. Personal implies emotion. Operational implies math. A screen at the far end of the room lit up, displaying projections that looked slightly worse than the ones he'd seen last quarter. Small changes. Cumulative effect. "We are not assigning blame," the chairwoman continued. "We are addressing consequences." There it was. Consequences. Not raised. Not emphasized. Repeated. Rice felt the weight of it then, not as accusation, but as assessment. Avera hadn't been removed. She had been revealed. Rice folded his hands on the table, fingers interlocked tightly enough to ache. "So what?" he said carefully. "You're saying my company depended on my partner's perception." The chairwoman didn't hesitate. "No. We're saying it depended on her judgment." That distinction settled heavily. Judgment isn't visibility. It isn't charm. It isn't presence. It's the quiet work that keeps structures upright. A board member across from Rice opened a folder. Avera's involvement recalibrated how risk was assessed. Several of our most conservative partners agreed to move forward because she was present. Rice frowned. She never signed off on final decisions. She didn't need to. the man replied. Her endorsement carried confidence. Educational truth lives here. Influence isn't always attached to authority. Often, it's attached to trust. Another board member spoke, voice steady. There was an assumption that her role was supportive rather than foundational. Rice exhaled sharply. You're saying I misrepresented her. We're saying the structure benefited from her presence more than it acknowledged, the chairwoman said. And now that presence is gone. Gone. Not revoked. Not withdrawn under pressure. Gone by choice. Rice leaned back slightly. So what happens now? The chairwoman tapped a pen lightly against her notes. Now we adjust expectations. Which means, Rice asked. Which means, she replied, we reduce exposure. The screen behind her shifted again. New projections. Slightly narrower margins. Revised timelines. Consequences don't shout, they revise. Rice stared at the numbers. You're punishing me for a personal matter. No, she said calmly. We're responding to a structural change. There was that word again. Structural. A board member added, this isn't about your relationship. It's about what her exit revealed. Rice's jaw tightened. And what did it reveal? That the organization relied on more than one center of gravity, the chairwoman said. And one of them has left. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Conclusive. Rice realized then that no amount of explanation would return what had been quietly removed. Avera hadn't taken anything with her. She had stopped holding things together, and the room knew it. The chairwoman closed her folder. That simple action carried more weight than any raised voice. We need to be clear, she said. This isn't a temporary adjustment. Rice's gaze lifted sharply. You're restructuring around her absence. Yes, another board member replied. And around what that absence exposed. Rice sat back, hands flattening on the table. So what am I supposed to do? The chairwoman didn't answer immediately. She looked around the room first, making sure everyone was aligned. Then she said it. You absorb the consequences. The word moved through the space again. Consequences, not as threat, not as warning, as fact. Educational truth lives here. When accountability reaches this level, explanations stop working. Systems respond to outcomes, not intentions. A man at the far end of the table spoke. We're not questioning your capability. We're questioning the environment of trust surrounding leadership. Rice laughed once, sharply. Because of my personal life? Because of decision-making patterns, the man replied calmly. Patterns, not moments, not accidents. Rice leaned forward. You're punishing me. No, the chairwoman said evenly. We're protecting the organization. Protection doesn't ask permission. It adjusts structure. Another board member added, investor confidence is not emotional. It's responsive. When stability changes, confidence follows. Rice looked at the screen again. So, what does this mean for me? The chairwoman's voice didn't soften. It means reduced authority over strategic direction. The words landed cleanly, no dramatics, no hesitation. Rice felt it then, not loss of title, but loss of assumption. The assumption that everything would continue because it always had. Effective immediately, she continued. We'll be implementing oversight protocols. Oversight. That word replaced trust without apology. Rice exhaled slowly. You're sidelining me. We're recalibrating, she corrected, because recalibration is what prevents collapse. Silence settled again. This wasn't humiliation. It was exposure without cruelty. Avera hadn't spoken to the board. She hadn't needed to. Her absence had done the explaining. And in that absence, the consequences had found their voice. The meeting ended without ceremony. No closing remarks, no reassurance. Just chairs moving back and folders closing in quiet agreement. Rice remained seated as the room emptied, watching board members leave in pairs, already discussing next steps that no longer included him at the center. That, more than anything, made it real. This wasn't discipline. It was redistribution. He stood slowly and gathered his things, movements measured, controlled, as if control still mattered here. Outside the boardroom, the hallway felt longer than usual. His assistant waited near the wall, eyes searching his face. "How bad is it?" she asked. Rise didn't answer immediately. "They're restructuring," he said finally. "Around her absence." The assistant nodded, not surprised. That was inevitable. He stopped walking. "You knew?" "I understood," she replied. She wasn't emotional. She was precise. Educational truth belongs here. Precision outlasts outrage. It reshapes systems quietly and permanently. Rice exhaled and continued down the hall. "They keep saying consequences." "Yes," the assistant said. "Because this isn't about blame. It's about exposure. Exposure, not scandal. Not accusation. Exposure of dependency. Exposure of imbalance. Exposure of assumptions no one questioned until they were removed." Later that evening, Rice sat alone in his office, lights dimmed, city stretching beyond the windows. His phone lay face down on the desk. For the first time, he didn't reach for it. He understood now what he had mistaken for forgiveness in the past. Silence wasn't tolerance. It was capacity being drained. Avera hadn't punished him. She had withdrawn support he never earned the right to misuse. And the system, cold, impartial, exact, had responded accordingly. This was the lesson no one teaches directly. When power is built on someone else's steadiness, losing that steadiness feels like collapse, even if nothing was taken from you. Rice leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The board hadn't asked him to apologize. They hadn't demanded explanation. They had simply adjusted structure to survive. And in doing so, they had made one thing unmistakably clear. The punishment wasn't emotional. It was structural. Rise didn't call her. Not this time. Calling her would mean acknowledging that the separation was real, that it had moved beyond conversation and into consequence. Instead, he called someone else. "Marcus," he said when the line connected. "I need you to look into something for me." Marcus had been his senior legal ally for years, the kind of man who understood favors without having to name them. "Is this about Avera?" Marcus asked. Rice paused. "She's acting out of hurt." There it was. Not responsibility, not admission. Reframing. "She's overreacting," Rice continued. "This doesn't need to go as far as she's pushing it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "She filed cleanly," he said finally. "There's nothing impulsive about it." Rice frowned. "She'll come around." "That assumption," Marcus replied, "isn't supported by her filings." Rice leaned back in his chair. "This isn't final." Marcus sighed softly. "It is. Educational truth settles here. When someone refuses accountability, they often replace it with authority, hoping influence can undo boundaries. "She doesn't understand what she's risking," Rice said. Marcus didn't argue. He didn't console. "She understands exactly what she's doing," he replied, "and she made sure no one could undo it for you." Rice straightened. "You're telling me there's nothing I can do?" "I'm telling you," Marcus said carefully, "that you don't get to approve her exit." Silence followed. Not stunned silence. Exposed silence. Rice ended the call without another word. For the first time, the idea surfaced, unwelcome and sharp. This wasn't about forgiveness. It was about permission, and she had stopped asking for it. The next call went to someone Rice rarely contacted directly. Elias Verne, a mutual power broker, connector, fixer, the kind of man who didn't hold positions but moved outcomes. "Rise," Elias said calmly. "I wondered when you'd call." Rise didn't bother with pleasantries. "I need you to talk to Avera." A pause. "About what?" Elias asked. "She's pushing this separation too far," Rice said. "She's acting emotionally." There it was again. Not distance, not clarity, emotion. Elias exhaled slowly. "You're misreading this." "She's reacting," Rice insisted. "She'll come around once she understands what she's risking." Educational truth lives here. Entitlement often disguises itself as concern. Elias didn't raise his voice. "She understands leverage better than anyone in that circle." Rice frowned. "Then why would she do this?" "Because she chose not to negotiate dignity," Elias replied. Rice leaned forward, irritation sharpening. I built that structure. You benefited from it, Elias corrected. She reinforced it. Silence followed. Rice tried again. This isn't final. It is, Elias said simply. And everyone knows it. Rice clenched his jaw. You're telling me no one will intervene? I'm telling you, Elias replied, that intervening would mean crossing boundaries she closed legally and socially. Rice scoffed. She doesn't get to walk away like this without consent. That was the belief, unspoken until now. A woman does not exit without approval. Elias's tone cooled. She already did. Rice stood, pacing. So, you're all just going to let her dismantle me? No, Elias said. We're letting you experience the result of your decisions. The line went quiet. When Elias spoke again, his words were precise. You're confusing influence with authority. The call ended shortly after. Rice stared at his phone, realization pressing in. Every door he reached for had already been closed. Not emotionally, systemically. Rice requested another meeting with the board. Not formally, strategically. He framed it as concern, as prudence, as leadership. By the time he entered the room, he already sensed the shift. The seats were arranged differently this time. He wasn't at the center. I think we're moving too quickly, Rice began. There's no need to rush irreversible decisions. The chairwoman folded her hands. What decision do you believe is reversible? Rice hesitated. Avera's withdrawal. Silence answered him first. Then one of the board members spoke. That process is complete. Rice frowned. She's acting out of hurt. The chairwoman's expression didn't change. We are not assessing her emotions. She doesn't understand what she's risking, Rice insisted. Another board member responded calmly. She evaluated that risk before she acted. Educational truth lands here. When ego replaces accountability, persuasion turns into pressure, and pressure reveals weakness. Rice leaned forward. This isn't final. The chairwoman looked directly at him. It is. He laughed once, sharp. So, we're just accepting this? We're respecting it, she replied. Rice straightened. You're letting her walk away without consequence. The chairwoman shook her head slightly. She accepted consequences. You are experiencing them. That distinction cut cleanly. Rice opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. For the first time, the room wasn't receptive, not resistant. Closed. We're slowing nothing down, the chairwoman said. Because there is nothing left to negotiate. Rice pushed back from the table. This is reckless. No, she replied. It's resolved. He stood, realizing too late that authority doesn't exist where consent has been withdrawn. As he left the room, one thing became clear. He wasn't being blocked emotionally. He was being blocked structurally. And structure doesn't bend to insistence. Rice sat alone in his office long after the building had emptied. No calls left to make. No doors left to knock on. Every attempt had returned the same result. Not rejection, but immovability. He scrolled through his contacts once more, then stopped. There was no point. Influence only works when someone allows access. Avera had removed access everywhere that mattered, not emotionally, systemically. He replayed the phrases he'd used, hearing them now without the shield of confidence. She's acting out of hurt. She'll come around. This isn't final. Each one rested on the same belief, that her decision required his approval. Educational truth settles here. Entitlement doesn't announce itself as control. It disguises itself as certainty. Rice had mistaken familiarity for ownership. He had believed longevity meant authority, that her steadiness meant permanence. It didn't. Her steadiness meant preparedness. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, realizing something uncomfortable but undeniable. Avera hadn't fought him. She hadn't needed to. She had removed the battlefield entirely. No emotional access, no legal leverage, no social intermediaries. Every route he tried led to the same closed structure. Not because she was cruel, because she was finished. Rice exhaled slowly, the weight of it settling in fully now. This wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about repair. It was about consent. And consent, once withdrawn, cannot be argued back into existence. For the first time since the restaurant, since the door, since the boardroom, Rice understood the scope of his miscalculation. Power doesn't come from authority when accountability is absent. It comes from preparation, and she had already moved on. Avera didn't hear about Corvin Hale through gossip. That alone made him different. The message came through her attorney's office, not marked urgent, not dressed in flattery. Just a request for a brief conversation, framed plainly. Regarding strategic continuity, no praise, no apology, no emotional language. She appreciated that. They met in a quiet conference room overlooking the city. Neutral space, no history attached to the walls. Corvin was already there when she arrived, standing beside the table, not seated at the head. That detail mattered. He didn't rush to shake her hand. He waited until she closed the door behind her, then nodded once. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said. Calm, measured. Avera took her seat. "I'm listening." He didn't smile. He didn't soften his voice to sound agreeable. There was no attempt to impress. "I won't take much of your time," Corvin said. "I'm here because your absence created clarity." She studied him. "Clarity for who?" "For everyone who mistook your role for optional," he replied. "Educational truth lives here. Real authority doesn't announce itself. It acknowledges what others overlooked." Avera folded her hands on the table. "You're not here to convince me to return." "No," Corvin said. "I'm here to acknowledge what you already decided." That stopped her. He continued. "The system adjusted, but it adjusted poorly." Avera raised an eyebrow slightly. "That's not my responsibility." "I agree," Corvin replied immediately, "which is why this isn't framed as repair." She waited. "This is restoration," he said, "of balance, of function, of influence that was never decorative." The room stayed quiet, not tense, attentive. Corvin met her gaze without expectation. "You don't owe anyone a second chance. But if you're open to leadership on your terms, there's a structure willing to be rebuilt correctly." Avera leaned back slightly. This wasn't an invitation, it was recognition. And recognition, she knew, changed everything. Corvin didn't open a folder. He didn't slide papers across the table. Instead, he spoke as if everything worth saying had already been prepared before he arrived. "I want to be clear," he said. "This isn't about optics." Avera watched him carefully. Men often said that right before presenting a carefully staged image. But Corvin didn't continue immediately. He waited, giving the sentence time to stand on its own. "The board recognizes the miscalculation," he went on, "not in losing you, but in misdefining you." Avera's expression remained neutral. "Recognition doesn't reverse impact." "No," Corvin agreed. "But it determines whether the next structure is honest. Educational truth settles here. Acknowledgement without defensiveness is rare and powerful." Avera crossed one leg over the other. "You're not asking me to fix what broke." "No," he said. "I'm asking if you want to build something that doesn't rely on invisibility." That phrasing mattered. He wasn't offering authority as compensation. He was naming authority that had already existed. "Your influence was informal," Corvin continued, "which made it easy to dismiss. We're not interested in repeating that." Avera studied him. "What exactly are you proposing?" He met her gaze calmly. "Formal leadership, defined scope, clear autonomy, no embellishment, no reassurance layered with expectation. And if I decline?" she asked. Corvin nodded once. "Then the structure adapts without you. No pressure, no warning, just reality." Avera leaned back slightly, considering. This wasn't persuasion. It was alignment. "You're not afraid I'll walk away again," she observed. He shook his head. "I'm aware that you will, if your boundaries aren't respected." That was the moment her attention sharpened. Respect, she knew, wasn't demonstrated through compliments. It showed up in how easily someone accepted a no. Corvin sat back, hands folded loosely. "Whatever you decide, it needs to be yours. Not convincing, not commanding." Clear. Avera didn't answer right away. She wasn't weighing power. She was measuring intent. You keep using the word restoration, she said. Explain what you mean. Corvin nodded slightly, as if he'd expected the question. Restoration isn't about returning to what existed, he said. It's about correcting what never worked properly. Educational truth sits here. Restoring function requires honesty about failure, not nostalgia. He continued, Your departure didn't create instability. It revealed where stability had been borrowed. Avera's gaze sharpened. Borrowed implies awareness. Not awareness, Corvin corrected. Convenience. That landed. Corvin leaned forward just enough to signal engagement, not pressure. You were carrying influence without authority, responsibility without protection. That imbalance benefited everyone except you. Avera exhaled slowly. And now you want to formalize what was informal. Yes, he said. Because informal power is easy to exploit. She studied his face. No defensiveness. No impatience. And this role, she asked, doesn't exist to counter rise. Corvin's answer was immediate. It exists regardless of him. That mattered. Leadership framed as retaliation collapses eventually, he continued. Leadership framed as function endures. Avera leaned back, absorbing that. This wasn't an offer to replace anyone. It was an offer to reposition truth where it belonged. What would my authority look like? She asked. Independent, Corvin replied. Visible. Protected. And my exit? She pressed. He didn't hesitate. Always respected. That answer held weight. Educational truth is simple, but rare. Real power doesn't trap. It allows departure without penalty. Avera nodded once. You're not asking me to prove anything. No, Corvin said. We already saw what happens when you leave. The room fell quiet again. This time, the silence carried possibility. Corvin stood first, not to end the meeting, but to signal that the decision wasn't urgent. I'll have my office send over the framework, he said. No deadlines. Avera rose as well. You're confident I won't disappear. Corvin met her gaze evenly. I'm confident you won't stay where respect is conditional. That settled something. They walked toward the door together, not side by side, but in alignment. No rush, no forced familiarity. At the threshold, Corvin stopped. One more thing. Avera turned. This role isn't a favor, he said. It's an acknowledgement. She nodded. I noticed. He held the door open. Whatever you decide, it won't be used against you. That, more than anything else he'd said, lingered. Educational truth lives here. Offers that respect autonomy don't need urgency to feel real. As Avera stepped into the hallway, she felt something unfamiliar. Not relief, not excitement. Possibility. Not because something had been promised, but because something had finally been named correctly. Across town, Rice sat in his office, unaware of the conversation that had just taken place. Not because it was hidden, but because it wasn't about him. That realization, when it eventually arrived, would matter. For now, Avera walked away from the building with the same calm she'd carried since the restaurant. No performance, no retaliation, just clarity, followed by choice. And for the first time since everything began to shift, the future wasn't closing. It was opening, carefully, deliberately, and on her terms. Rice stared at his phone longer than he meant to. It had been face down on the desk since the board meeting, as if ignoring it could delay what he already knew was coming. He had lost access everywhere else. This was the last place where silence still felt like control. He picked it up. Her name appeared before he typed it. That stopped him. He hadn't expected that. He thought he'd feel anger or resolve. Instead, there was hesitation, the kind that shows up when certainty has already left the room. He pressed call. It rang once, twice. He almost ended it himself. Then she answered. Yes, Avera said. No greeting, no edge, just presence. Rice didn't speak right away. The silence stretched, not awkward, not tense, just unfilled. She didn't rush him. Educational truth lives here. When someone stops managing your emotions, silence becomes your responsibility. I saw the articles, he said finally. Another pause. I assumed you would, she replied. Her voice didn't carry satisfaction. It didn't carry guilt either. I didn't think it would go this far, he said. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her tone was even. You didn't think distance would be noticed? He swallowed. You could have stopped this. I did, she said. By stopping myself, that landed heavier than accusation. Rice leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Everyone's acting like I don't exist. You exist, Avera replied. You're just no longer buffered. Silence returned, longer this time. He hadn't prepared for how quiet accountability sounded. Rice shifted in his chair, the quiet pressing closer now. He had entered the call expecting confrontation, explanations, a list of grievances he could respond to. What he hadn't expected was the absence of demand. That meeting you had, he said slowly. With Corvin, a pause. Yes, Avera replied. You're moving on quickly. She didn't answer right away. This silence was different, not empty. Considered. I'm moving forward accurately, she said at last. Educational truth lives here. Healing isn't measured by time. It's measured by alignment. Rice's grip tightened around the phone. So, that's it? That depends, Avera replied. On what you're asking. He exhaled through his nose. I don't even know how to ask it. Then don't rush, she said. Another stretch of quiet followed, long enough for him to hear his own breathing, long enough to realize how often she had filled spaces like this for him before. I keep thinking, he said, voice lower now, that if I'd handled things differently. She didn't interrupt. You wouldn't have closed every door. That's probably true, Avera said. The honesty startled him. Then why does it feel like you wanted this? He asked. I wanted clarity, she replied. What followed was structure. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You don't sound angry. I'm not, she said. That was the moment something in him faltered. Anger, at least, would have meant connection. Silence meant distance that didn't need defending. Rice swallowed. I need to know something. She waited. The pause before the question felt heavier than the question itself. Rice took a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Do you hate me? The words came out quieter than he intended. Not dramatic, not defensive. Exposed. Avera didn't answer immediately. The silence that followed wasn't punishment. It was consideration, the kind given when the truth deserves accuracy. No, she said finally. Just that. No explanation, no softening. Educational truth lives here. Hatred keeps people emotionally engaged. Indifference releases them. Rice closed his eyes. That answer hurt more than anger would have. Then why does this feel like I've lost everything? He asked. Because you built your sense of stability on access, Avera replied. And access ended. He nodded slowly, though she couldn't see it. I thought love meant forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't require proximity, she said. And it doesn't erase patterns. Her voice remained steady, not rehearsed, not distant, just resolved. I miss you, he said. Another pause. I know, Avera replied. That doesn't change what's true. Rice leaned back, phone pressed to his ear, ceiling blurring slightly. You really don't need anything from me. No, she said gently. I needed honesty. When that failed, I needed distance. The words weren't cruel. They were final. Rice swallowed. So this is it. This is clarity, Avera said. Silence returned again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was settled. Rice stayed silent longer than he had before. The kind of silence that wasn't searching for words, only courage. Is there someone else? He asked at last. The question wasn't sharp. It wasn't jealous. It was resigned. Avera didn't answer immediately. Not because she was deciding what to say, but because she understood what the answer would end. Yes, she said. There is someone else. The words didn't come with explanation. They didn't need one. Rice felt his chest tighten, breath catching for just a second before he forced it steady. He had expected denial, or deflection. What he hadn't prepared for was certainty. He nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see it. I guess that was inevitable. No, Avera replied. It was intentional. That distinction mattered. Educational truth lives here. Moving on isn't betrayal when trust has already been broken. Rice swallowed. Does he know about me? He knows about honesty, she said. That's enough. The line went quiet again. This silence wasn't waiting. It was done. I hope you're happy, Rice said finally. I'm peaceful, Avera replied. That came first. He let out a slow breath. Goodbye, Avera. Goodbye, Rice. The call ended without ceremony. No final plea. No apology left hanging. Just a truth delivered cleanly. And for those listening right now, let this question sit with you, not as judgment, but as reflection. Is forgiveness required when trust is gone? You don't have to answer out loud, but you do owe yourself honesty. Avera didn't agree to the second meeting immediately, not because she was uncertain, because she no longer rushed decisions to make other people comfortable. When she did arrive, Corvin was already seated, not at the center of the table, not at the head. Papers were neatly stacked to one side, untouched. You took your time, he said calmly. Yes, Avera replied. I needed to. He nodded. That's reasonable. No comment, no implication. Respect, she noticed, didn't require explanation. Corvin slid the folder toward her, but didn't open it. Before we talk terms, I want to be explicit about something. Avera looked at him. Go on. This role exists whether you accept it or not, he said. We're not offering leverage. We're acknowledging function. Educational truth lives here. Real power doesn't coerce participation. It invites consent. Avera opened the folder herself. The terms were clean. No hidden dependencies. No clauses that implied indebtedness. Autonomy is defined, she said. Yes, Corvin replied, non-negotiable. And exit? Guaranteed. She paused. You're not afraid I'll leave again? Corvin met her gaze evenly. I'm more concerned about what happens if you stay without authority. That answer mattered. Avera leaned back, considering. This wasn't rescue. It wasn't revenge. It was alignment. You're offering leadership without expectation of loyalty, she said. I'm offering leadership with expectation of honesty, Corvin replied. Silence followed, thoughtful, not heavy. For the first time since the call ended, Avera felt something shift. Not obligation, choice. Avera read through the document slowly. Not because it was complex, but because she had learned what urgency often hides. These terms, she said, tapping the page lightly, don't bind my influence to anyone's approval. That's intentional, Corvin replied. Influence weakens when it requires permission. Educational truth lives here. Autonomy isn't a perk of leadership. It's the foundation of it. She flipped to the next section. Decision authority is clearly outlined. Yes, Corvin said. No informal expectations, no shadow approvals. And reporting lines? She asked. Transparent, he replied. You report outcomes, not obedience. That distinction mattered more than titles ever had. Avera closed the folder briefly. You're not asking me to restore what existed. No, Corvin said. I'm asking you to define what should exist. He didn't lean in. He didn't lower his voice. There was no performance in his delivery. This role doesn't function as a counterbalance to anyone, he continued. It functions as a stabilizing axis. Avera considered that. And if my judgment conflicts with the board, Corvin answered without hesitation, then the conflict is addressed openly, not redirected around you. That was new. Educational truth is simple but rare. Respect shows up in how disagreement is handled. Avera nodded slowly. You're building a structure that doesn't depend on goodwill. Goodwill fades, Corvin replied. Clarity endures. She looked at the document again, noticing what wasn't there. No language about loyalty, no implied gratitude, no future favors embedded in phrasing. Just responsibility paired with authority. "You've removed every reason I would hesitate," she said. Corvin didn't smile. "Then the decision can finally be yours." The room settled into a quiet that felt earned, not suspense. Readiness. Avera didn't reach for a pen. That wasn't hesitation, it was intention. "Before I decide," she said, "I need to know how disagreement works here." Corvin nodded once. "Then let's talk about that." He shifted the folder slightly, not toward her, but to the center of the table. Shared space. "When your judgment conflicts with mine," he said, "the expectation is dialogue, not deference. Educational truth lives here. Mutual respect isn't agreement, it's the safety to disagree without penalty." "And if the board disagrees with both of us?" Avera asked. "Then we document the disagreement," Corvin replied. "And we move forward transparently. No smoothing. No politics." Avera studied him. "You're not threatened by authority that doesn't flatter you." Corvin allowed a brief pause before answering. "Authority that needs flattery isn't authority." That answer settled something. She leaned back slightly, arms relaxed. "You're not asking me to be loyal to you." "No," he said. "I'm asking you to be loyal to the work." That was the difference between control and collaboration. Educational truth belongs here. Dependency weakens leadership. Shared purpose strengthens it. Avera glanced toward the window, then back to him. "You understand that accepting this doesn't mean I'm healed." Corvin met her gaze calmly. "I'm not hiring healing. I'm recognizing competence. No personal framing. No emotional expectation. Just clarity." Avera nodded slowly. For the first time, the idea of stepping back into leadership didn't feel like exposure. It felt like positioning, not to prove anything, but to build something honest. The silence that followed wasn't anticipation. It was alignment beginning to take shape. Avera picked up the pen, not with ceremony, not with relief, with certainty. She signed once, then again. Each stroke deliberate, unhurried. Corvin watched without comment. When she finished, she slid the document back across the table. "This doesn't mean I'm aligning myself against anyone." "I wouldn't accept it if you were," Corvin replied. "Educational truth lives here. Leadership rooted in opposition collapses. Leadership rooted in clarity endures." They stood at the same time. Not rehearsed, just aligned. "I won't protect egos," Avera said. "Including yours." Corvin nodded. "That's part of the role. And I won't stay where autonomy is threatened." He met her gaze. "Then we won't threaten it. No promises beyond that. No gestures meant to reassure. Just boundaries respected in advance." As they walked toward the door, Avera felt the weight of the past loosen, not because it was erased, but because it no longer dictated the future. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't repair. It was repositioning. Power exercised without cruelty doesn't announce itself. It simply functions. Outside, the city moved on as it always had. But inside her, something had shifted, not emotionally, but structurally. She hadn't taken anything from anyone. She had accepted what was already hers. And for the first time since the restaurant, the choice felt complete. Rice woke before his alarm, not because he was rested, because something in him already knew the day wouldn't belong to him. He reached for his phone without sitting up, thumb moving out of habit. Notifications stacked higher than usual. Messages from people who rarely texted before 8. Missed calls he hadn't heard ring. He opened the first article. Not the title yet. Not the photo. He read the byline first. It wasn't gossip. That detail mattered. Then the headline came into view. It didn't accuse. It didn't dramatize. It stated, "A strategic shift. A leadership appointment." A name placed where his used to be adjacent, now absent. Rice sat up slowly. Alone. The apartment felt larger in the morning light. No shared rhythm. No one else moving through the space. Just him, the screen, and the weight of something that had already passed him by. Educational truth lives here. Losing control of the narrative doesn't happen when people speak badly of you. It happens when they stop needing your version. He scrolled. There it was. The photo. A Vera, composed, centered, not posed, not smiling for approval. Beside her stood Corvin Hale, not touching, not angled toward her, aligned. Rice stared at the image longer than he meant to. The photo didn't humiliate him. That was the problem. It replaced him. No commentary followed the image, no speculation attached. Just quiet confirmation that something had moved forward without waiting. He locked the phone and set it face down on the table. For the first time since everything began to shift, there was nothing he could say that would change what had already been understood. The reckoning hadn't arrived with noise. It had arrived with absence. Rice didn't share the article. He didn't comment on it either. He watched as others did. Messages came in slowly at first. Short, careful. Saw the announcement. Hope you're doing well. Big changes happening. No questions. That was new. When people stop asking questions, it means they've accepted the answer without you. Educational truth lives here. Silence from others often signals consensus, not confusion. Rice opened the image again. It wasn't the placement that unsettled him. It was the framing. Avera stood centered, shoulders relaxed, gaze steady, not triumphant, not defensive. She wasn't claiming victory. She was occupying space that now fit her. Corvin stood beside her without dominance. No arm, no gesture of possession, just presence that didn't intrude. The photo didn't suggest replacement. It suggested continuity. That distinction mattered. Rice scrolled through comments beneath the article. They weren't cruel. They weren't celebratory. They were observational. This makes sense. Long overdue. Clear direction now. Clear. That word stung more than insult would have. He refreshed the page. No rebuttals surfaced. No counter-narratives formed. He realized then that the story had moved beyond interpretation. No one was waiting for his statement. No one was asking for his perspective. The narrative didn't turn against him. It turned away. Rice leaned back against the kitchen counter, phone in hand, feeling the weight of something unfamiliar. This wasn't being exposed. It was being outpaced. And that kind of loss doesn't invite argument. It invites reckoning. Rice attended the next industry gathering out of habit. He told himself it mattered to stay visible. That absence would look like admission. The room was familiar. The faces were not. Conversations paused when he approached. Not abruptly, not rudely. Just enough to signal adjustment. Smiles appeared, brief and contained. Hands shook, then released quickly. No one lingered. No one asked how he was holding up. Educational truth lives here. Scandal feeds on attention. Silence feeds on resolution. A man he'd known for years nodded politely. "Good to see you." "You too," Rice replied. That was it. No follow-up. No invitation to continue. Rice moved through the room, glass untouched, observing how easily he was bypassed. Conversations resumed behind him without lowering their volume. No one feared being overheard. He realized then that nothing dramatic had been said about him. Nothing needed to be. The absence of defense was louder than any accusation. People weren't choosing sides. They were choosing stability. Rice stepped outside onto the terrace, the cool air settling around him. The city moved on below, indifferent to personal recalibrations. He checked his phone again. Still nothing from Avera. Not because she was avoiding him, because she no longer needed to respond. That was the difference. Silence hadn't followed scandal. It had followed conclusion. Rice leaned against the railing, understanding finally that reputation doesn't collapse when people turn on you. It collapses when they stop turning toward you. And that kind of reckoning offers no argument, no appeal, no final statement to reclaim ground. It simply stands, waiting for you to understand what's already been decided. Rice returned home earlier than he planned, not because the event ended, because there was no reason to stay. The apartment was quiet in a way he hadn't noticed before. Not empty, resolved. Everything sat where it belonged. Nothing waited for him. He placed his keys on the counter and stood there for a long moment, unsure what he was listening for. There were no notifications now, no clarifications requested, no defenses required, no outrage to respond to. Educational truth lives here. Scandal demands reaction. Resolution demands nothing. Rice opened his laptop and searched his name. The results weren't unkind. They were minimal. Older articles, past achievements, a few recent mentions that no longer centered him. The narrative hadn't turned hostile. It had moved on. He scrolled once more, then closed the screen. The loudest thing in the room was the absence of urgency. No one was waiting for his explanation. No one was speculating anymore. No one needed closure from him. The reckoning hadn't arrived as punishment. It arrived as irrelevance. Rice sat down slowly, the weight of it finally settling without resistance. This was the cost he hadn't calculated. Not public judgment, not disgrace, disconnection. He had lost control of the story not because someone exposed him, but because the story no longer required him to continue. Silence had taken over, not as a threat, but as confirmation. And silence, once it arrives at this level, doesn't argue. They chose a cafe neither of them had history with. That was deliberate. No memories attached to the walls. No staff who recognized them as a pair. Just neutral space, open windows, and daylight that left nothing hidden. Avera arrived first. She chose a table near the window, back straight, phone placed face down. She wasn't preparing lines. She wasn't rehearsing composure. She had already done the work required for calm. Rice arrived 5 minutes later. He hesitated when he saw her, as if unsure whether to approach. That hesitation was new. It spoke more clearly than confidence ever had. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said as he sat. Avera nodded. "I wanted closure without confusion." He studied her face, searching for something familiar. Anger, softness, a trace of what used to be available. He found none of it. "You look different," he said. "So do you," she replied, not unkindly, not defensively, accurately. A server approached. Avera ordered tea. Rice ordered coffee he wouldn't finish. When they were alone again, Rice spoke first. "I didn't think we'd ever get here like this." Avera met his gaze. "We didn't get here suddenly. Educational truth lives here. Endings rarely begin at the end. They begin the first time truth is delayed." He nodded slowly. "I've been thinking a lot." "I know," she said. "I've been moving forward." That difference landed quietly between them. Rice leaned back in his chair. "I should have been honest." "Yes," Avera said. "You should have." No emphasis, no edge, just agreement. He exhaled. Would it have changed anything? Avera didn't answer immediately. This wasn't a dramatic pause. It was a careful one. "Yes," she said at last. "It would have changed who you were to me." Rice closed his eyes briefly. That answer hurt because it wasn't cruel. It was clean. They sat in silence again, the hum of the cafe filling the space between them. No one stared. No one whispered. This wasn't spectacle. It was truth meeting daylight. Rice wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, more for something to hold than to drink. "I lost more than I expected," he said quietly. Avera didn't interrupt. Loss, she had learned, didn't need commentary. It needed recognition. "I thought the separation was about us," he continued. "I didn't realize how much of my life was built on what you carried." She nodded once. "That's common. Not dismissive. Not validating. Observational. Educational truth lives here. People often recognize support only after it's withdrawn." Rice looked up. "I never meant to take you for granted." "Intent doesn't change impact," Avera replied gently. He accepted that without argument. That too was new. "I'm not here to ask you back," he said after a moment. "I know that door is closed." Avera held his gaze. "I appreciate you saying that. The absence of negotiation was its own relief. I just needed to say I understand now," he added. "Not everything, but enough." Avera considered him. The sincerity was real and late. Understanding doesn't rewind time, she said, but it does change how you move forward. He nodded. I wish I had learned that sooner. I wish you had too, she replied. No bitterness, no softness that invited hope. Just truth exchanged evenly. Rice hesitated, then asked, Do you ever think about what we were? Yes, Avera said. I think about what I accepted. That answer carried weight, not accusation, reflection. He swallowed. I didn't know how close I was to losing everything. You didn't, she agreed, because someone was always steadying the ground. Rice looked down at the table. You won't do that for me anymore. No, she said. And that's necessary. The cafe buzzed around them, cups clinking, voices overlapping, but the space between them felt still. This was the peak. Not dramatic, not explosive, honest. Rice sat back in his chair, as if finally accepting that there was nothing left to reach for. I loved you, he said, not as a plea, not as a claim, as a fact he needed to release. Avera didn't look away. I know. That answer wasn't dismissive. It was complete. But I loved you the wrong way, he added. I thought love meant being chosen no matter what. Avera folded her hands calmly. Love doesn't mean immunity from consequences. Educational truth lives here. Love without respect becomes entitlement, even when it feels sincere. Rice nodded slowly. I confused forgiveness with permission. Yes, she said, and permission can be withdrawn. He exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and grief. I don't think I ever learned how to sit with loss. You're learning now, Avera replied. That matters. They sat quietly for a moment, not because anything was unsaid, but because everything necessary had already been spoken. Rice looked at her one last time. You don't owe me anything. No, she said, and I don't carry guilt for choosing peace. That was the final truth. Not sharp, not defensive. Free. He stood first this time, not abruptly, with acceptance. I hope you build something better, he said. Avera stood as well. I already am. They shared a brief nod, not intimacy, not nostalgia, mutual recognition. Then Rice turned and walked away. Avera remained where she was, watching the sunlight move across the cafe floor. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt finished. Finished carrying explanations. Finished absorbing imbalance. Finished protecting someone from the weight of their own choices. And that, she knew, was the real ending. Not revenge, not replacement, release. Avera didn't see Corvin immediately after the cafe. That mattered. There was no dramatic pivot from ending to beginning, no emotional overlap, no blurred lines. Life continued in its ordinary rhythm. Workdays, quiet evenings, routines that asked nothing of her but presence. When they did meet again, it wasn't framed as anything more than it was. A scheduled check-in, a review of progress, a conversation anchored in function. They sat across from each other in a shared workspace, laptops open, notes scattered between them, no lowered voices, no private corner claimed. How does this feel so far? Corvin asked. Not how do you feel about me, about the work. Avera considered the question. Clear, she said. Which is new. He nodded. Clarity tends to slow things down. Educational truth lives here. Stability grows when urgency is removed. They spoke about strategy, about long-term planning, about boundaries that had already been respected without discussion. Corvin didn't step into her space unless invited. He didn't assume availability. He didn't frame presence as entitlement. That absence of pressure created something unexpected. Ease. Not comfort built on familiarity, but comfort built on trust that wasn't being tested. At the end of the meeting, Corvin closed his laptop first. We don't need to extend this, Avera smiled faintly. Agreed. He stood. I'll see you at the next review. No lingering. No attempt to convert progress into proximity. As he walked away, Avera noticed something important. She didn't feel rescued. She didn't feel chosen. She felt respected. And that was the difference between beginnings that last and beginnings that only distract from endings. This one wasn't trying to be anything yet. It was simply honest. Weeks passed without ceremony. No defining moment marked the shift from professional alignment to something more attentive. What changed wasn't the nature of their interaction. It was the consistency of it. Corvin didn't ask personal questions framed as concern. He asked practical ones framed as respect. Is this pace sustainable? Does this structure still work for you? Do you need space before the next phase? Each question assumed autonomy, not availability. Educational truth lives here. People who respect boundaries don't test them to prove closeness. Avera noticed the difference most during moments of disagreement. When she challenged a proposal, Corvin didn't defend it reflexively. He listened, adjusted, sometimes withdrew it entirely. That doesn't align, she said once. Then we don't move forward with it, he replied. No persuasion, no disappointment masked as patience, just alignment corrected in real time. They shared meals occasionally, always planned, never improvised. Conversations stayed grounded. When silence appeared, neither rushed to fill it. This wasn't emotional restraint. It was mutual discipline. One evening, as they wrapped up a long session, Corvin paused. I want to name something clearly. Avera looked up. This dynamic, he said, is not a substitute for anything you lost. She nodded. I know. And it's not a solution, he continued. It stands on its own, or not at all. That mattered. Educational truth is quiet but firm. Healthy connections don't promise completion. They offer compatibility. Avera met his gaze steadily. I don't need saving. Corvin responded without hesitation. I've never assumed you did. The silence that followed wasn't charged. It was affirmed. Whatever this was becoming, it wasn't rushed into meaning. It was allowed to earn it. It wasn't one conversation that changed things. It was the absence of pressure across many. There was no moment where Avera woke up and realized something new had begun. Instead, she noticed what hadn't happened. She hadn't felt diminished, hurried, or required to perform gratitude for stability. That was new. One evening, they walked out of the building together after a long session. Not intentionally. Their schedules had simply aligned. It's getting colder, Corvin observed. Yes, Avera replied. It is. They walked a short distance in silence before Corvin spoke again. I want to be clear about something. She looked at him. I don't expect anything from you beyond what you've already agreed to, he said. And I won't frame proximity as progress. Educational truth lives here. Genuine connection doesn't mistake access for entitlement. Avera considered that. I don't need certainty right now. Corvin nodded. Neither do I. That answer settled the space between them. They stopped at the corner where their paths separated. No hesitation, no lingering implication. I'll see you next week, Corvin said. Yes, Avera replied. As she walked away, she noticed something quietly important. There was no emotional pull urging her backward. No anxiety about what might be lost if she didn't look over her shoulder. Whatever this was becoming didn't require vigilance. It didn't feed on contrast with the past. It didn't define itself through recovery. It existed on its own terms. Later that night, Avera reflected on the difference. She hadn't been rescued. She hadn't been replaced in someone else's story. She had chosen alignment over intensity, and that choice, uncelebrated, steady, and unforced, was the beginning that mattered most. This story was never about a text message. It was about what people believe love allows them to do. Rice believed love meant forgiveness without accountability. That affection created a safety net strong enough to catch every lie. He believed that reassurance could replace honesty, that charm could delay consequences, and that silence from the woman who loved him meant tolerance. He was wrong. Love is not measured by what someone says in private. It is measured by what they choose to do when no one is managing the fallout for them. Avera didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. She didn't compete for explanations. She observed behavior and responded to it. That distinction matters. Silence is often mistaken for weakness. But silence, when paired with action, is clarity. It is the moment someone stops arguing with a version of you that no longer exists. Walking away didn't make Vera cruel. It made her accurate. She didn't destroy a man. She removed herself from protecting him from his own choices. And when that protection disappeared, the systems that had been leaning on her steadiness adjusted accordingly. That wasn't revenge. That was consequence. This is the lesson most people learn too late. You cannot build security on someone else's restraint and expect it to last forever. Vera didn't win by replacing Rise. She didn't win by humiliating him. She didn't win by proving anything. She won by choosing alignment over attachment. And that choice revealed something powerful. When someone stops absorbing imbalance, everything around them recalibrates. Love is behavior, not words, not apologies delivered after exposure, not promises made when options are gone. Silence is not weakness when it is paired with boundaries. It is often the strongest response available. And walking away, fully, cleanly, without performance, can be the most instructive consequence of all. Because it leaves no one to blame, no argument to win, no story left to control, only truth. And truth, when left standing on its own, teaches better than punishment ever could. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose clarity over comfort or silence over explanation, consider subscribing to Midnight Story Vault. This channel is for stories with consequences, stories that don't rush forgiveness, stories that respect intelligence, boundaries, and growth. And if you know someone who needs this lesson, someone struggling to walk away from what keeps costing them peace, share this story with them. Sometimes the right story arrives at the exact moment someone needs permission to choose themselves. Thank you for spending this time here. I'll see you in the next story.